lost the ability how to talk to each other. Like I was literally, again, I was just on the BBC Radio 4 and I was talking about this with Hogwarts Legacy recently. It was like, look, we could all disagree about this game. We could all disagree about a lot of things, but we can't vilify other people for feeling different than us. I think also there is an element that you have to be honest about. And the industry side, whether it's media, whether it's PR, whether it's devs or indie devs like that, where there's a sense of like, there's a sense of cliquishness that sometimes it almost feels like childish or high schoolish, whereas like certain things run within a certain group or a bubble of people where we need to get out of that, because all of a sudden you criticize one person, now all of a sudden now you're not going to get access to a game and stuff. And that's totally wrong and totally messed up. But it happens in my career over my 13 years or so, where I've been open about something, I've talked about something, I've been scrutinizing or criticizing something and giving my honest opinion about something. And because a person didn't like what I had to say, you know, they would totally cut off our relationship or friendship or our connection within the industry, whether it's PR, whether it's dev and stuff. It's like all of a sudden now you want to be labeling people as bad individuals or bad eggs because you feel differently about something. You can't just disagree like adults. You can feel different and disagree and debate and argue the whole thing, but we can't vilify people. Like with Frosk, a lot of people definitely vilified her for what she did, and I understand it why, you know, but obviously there's an element of like, look, dial it back and judge for the actions and for what it was without trying to scrutinize and completely depersonalize an individual, which I think felt like happens way too often in our industry.
Hello and welcome to Culturescape. It is great to be here with all of you today. Culturescape is a show that interviews the geeks, nerds, and creators that have influenced our modern nerd community. I have the privilege here of speaking with JakeJames Lugo, has an excellent YouTube channel, great conversationalist, and he's covered the G4TV stuff very thoroughly. And he reached out and said, hey, we should talk about this. I think that's good. This is a good way to follow up on what we went through in the last episode, because the last episode was ridiculously long. I know it was kind of heavy. If you were not interested really in the G4 story, that probably didn't do a lot for you. But Jake is here to lead us through, to talk about some of the stuff he's observed about the story, about how people handle it or talk about it. And I think it'll be fun. Thanks so much, Jake, for making this happen.
Yeah, thanks for responding back and just hitting me back up and stuff. Because again, I figured this is good conversation to have, you know, to be honest about this stuff. Because again, there's so much has happened in the last year. It's been kind of ridiculous. And then obviously you just had the exclusive with Frosk, you know, talking about a lot of stuff, which I don't think anybody else really deserved to get anywhere else, you know, to actually dive into that type of stuff. Because you've reported on it more than anybody else besides myself. You know, you've done a lot of different detailed stuff, and I figured this would be cool to kind of talk a little bit more about it, because I felt a certain type of way about a lot of things, you know, that Frost kept brought up and that you guys really got into. So I figured this would be cool to do so.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's an interesting topic. It's very charged. I'm curious sometimes because I had covered it some, and then I had done some reporting on it, and then I was looking through this stuff, and then it was over the holiday break. And then in January, the Adam Sessler interview came out, and I was like, has Frost talked to anyone? And I feel dumb because this is something maybe I should have realized. So I went back and looked through, Washington Post has covered it, Kotaku covered it. Did anyone actually talk to the Frosk? And it was no, which was like, oh. Yeah,
which is surprising. To say the least.
Yeah, so that's kind of how that stuff came together. Yeah. How did your interest come into it? Did you enjoy G4TV back in the day?
So I'm an old fan of G4 because I grew up with G4. I grew up with Extended Play and X-Play. You know, so I've been watching people like Adam Sessler, Morgan Webb, obviously a lot of the tech screensaver guys, you know, from Tech TV days, you know, before it was officially branded G4. So a lot of old school stuff for some people. And I think a lot of people could kind of relate to me in the sense is like, you know, you've seen a lot of changes with this type of stuff. I mean, again, I watched X Play religiously, like every single day after school, because it used to go up either with a single episode or a double episode on like DirecTV and stuff whenever they had the channel for G4 back then. And that was just like kind of like my gateway into games coverage as far as, getting introduced into the idea of covering video games as like an entertainment medium, as like, quote unquote content creator. Because I was like really the beginnings of YouTube, or like right before then. Because at some point, when they started doing Attack of the Show and stuff, and there was like other shows where they started covering YouTube or viral videos. So it's very early days of like that time frame for the internet before we know it as it is now.
No, definitely. I loved X-Play. I loved that they would do different documentaries. I thought all those were great.
Icons. That was Icons.
Yes, I have good memories of some, like the Mega Man one. That kind of stuff fascinated me because I had enjoyed games, but I guess I never thought critically about it. How did those things come together? And, G4 was, a lot of people just like the entertainment value and it had a mix. But for me, that was kind of what I got. I was like, whoa, there's this huge universe I never even realized was there.
It's cool. And again, like it's wild seeing how things have changed so much, for better or worse. Because again, I've watched all of old G4 right up to the point where they stopped, that they canceled X-Play, they canceled the whole network for the most part. And then I was excited. I was one of the few people that was really excited to actually see this network, or this whole entire brand come back in some fashion, because obviously things had changed for many of us, between the internet becoming a thing, YouTube becoming a thing, streaming and content creation becoming more than what it was, in traditional G4 days and stuff. Like, how would they approach that? How they would actually like kind of, implement a lot of things that have changed over time into what they did best. Because I think that despite all the crazy things you could criticize G4 for, their content, for what it was, you could definitely say that they at least brought something to the table that helped influence a lot of stuff that what we have now. Because a lot of people like ourselves and many other YouTubers, content creators, even some of the bigger ones that have like millions of subscribers, they would probably say that they were also influenced by G4 in some way.
No, definitely. And I think that makes sense because the amount of energy that has been dedicated to this stuff is pretty intense. I was only barely aware that they were bringing it back because I think they announced maybe the beginning of 2021 this was happening, and so I was aware this was going to happen eventually, but I wasn't paying a lot of attention. And then in January I started seeing it drips and drabs. Of course, then the stuff happened with Frosk, but then I was like, oh.
The beach house. Oh. That was the other thing. The not launch, but like the pre-launch of G4. I know the beach house was like a big thing where they had the shows going on. They had the F&E sports show at one point, and like other like videos they were posting up something random. Like it was, I'm not gonna lie, it was goofy and weird seeing how all the lead up, because they also had that Thanksgiving special. They had all the old hosts there for like that one time.
Yeah, I remember that.
Randomly.
Yeah.
Like it was just goofy.
Goofy sometimes is okay. I think that was Goofy is probably the least of G4's problems.
Right? Like for real.
Were you someone, because there are a lot of people who are now saying they never should have tried, G4 was totally dead, there's no interest in it, there's nothing they could do to make it work. Were you kind of like that? Or are you more like, it could have worked if it was handled right? Where do you fall?
I find myself into the latter, because I've always said, and again, in all the podcasts that I've talked about it and all the stuff that I've written about when I was talking about the news, this brand could have worked. This whole thing, a lot of the old shows, a lot of the old ideas and concepts could have worked if they were handled with better care, but also with better people behind them. I don't necessarily mean just the talent. I mean the people that were actually dictating stuff, because when you really think about G4 before it launched, or right up to the point where it launched, a lot of people really remember G4 for Attack of the Show and X-Play. And then probably if you watch it for a long time, you probably remember Arena, you probably remember Icons, you probably remember Cheat, you probably remember all these different things besides the reruns of like Ninja Warrior or Cops or even Code Monkeys or whatever else. Like those are still like your core things. And they even said at Comic-Con, remember they did the whole announcement at Comic-Con, I believe at San Diego Comic-Con, that they were going to bring it back. And those were the two shows that they were going to like head marquee stuff with to bring it back. The problem is though, is that I feel like not only did you have people that were so caught up on the old ways of like doing things that like without like taking what worked for them and like adapting it for what worked now, especially in this environment, but it also feels like now looking back in hindsight, knowing what we know now, it seems like there was a lot of like, okay, you got this. Okay, you could go work with this. Okay, you could handle this type of thing. At least what it looks like on the outside looking in. based on what a lot of people have said and stuff, because there seems to be a lot of turmoil over there, but a lot of turnover, a lot of people like doing multiple things at the same time, not having a dedicated team or a dedicated individual to like handle stuff. If you remember, I forgot his name at the moment, so I apologize, but there was the guy that used to work on the old Attack of the Show that he did an interview, like I want to say like a couple months ago prior to the new year.
Are you thinking Chris Gore maybe?
Not Chris Gore. It was another person. I reported.
Oh, so he was more like a regular. Chris was kind of like
Chris was an actual personality, but that was old
Yeah.
G4. He was an actual person from the camera. I'm talking about someone that actually was behind the camera working. I can't remember their name at the moment. I wrote about it on Clownfish TV. I did a whole thing about the interview that he did. And one of the things that he had said was that he had been talking to a lot of people behind the scenes during the Beach House, even way before they even launched, about how chaotic it was. And the main problem is that you had this constant group of people, or just rotation of people that just didn't know what they were doing. They were just doing things or just kind of like winging it in a way where it didn't feel like there was a cohesive direction, a cohesive like mindset, a cohesive mission towards what this network was going to be now, as opposed to what it was. And that's even before all the other crazy stuff with the rants and the other things on social media, which contributed to it. But again, it was all a hodgepodge of messiness.
Yeah, bad foundation. I think
understatement of the year.
Yeah. I remember when they were, I kind of feel like some of this is like the return of the problems of the original G4, because if you remember towards the end, there was a lot of, it seemed like they didn't really know what their brand identity was. Besides, Attack of the Show stayed like pretty strong for a very long time, but even X-Play, towards the end there, it was like constant reruns, petering out, new hosts. It just didn't kind of work. And it feels like
it was, though? Honestly, a lot of those problems came from Attack of the Show. A lot of people seem to forget that. Like, a lot of things that people complain about with old G4 originated in Attack of the Show. The old segments with Olivia Munn, with the hot dog, the licking, the skimpy outfits and stuff that people complained about later on, saying that it needed to be changed or whatever else. All that really came from Attack of the Show. Like, a lot of the goofiness and the awkward humor came from X-Play, because that had always been there, even all the way back in the extended play, before they started really getting heavy with the skits and stuff.
You are going really deep. You're like,
like when you're this stuff, when you live with it, like you stick with it, it sticks with you. But like my main thing is that like there was a lot of good elements to that old G4 formula, which again, it was the right time, the right place for the right generation growing up back then. In what we have now for a lot of people that became content creators or working for some of these other outlets, entertainment or otherwise. But like you said, there was a real struggle with like a sense of direction, a sense of identity, and a sense of just like, I think honestly, personally, leadership in a way where it's like, look, this is what we need to do. This is what we have to do. Things like what I know during your interview with Frosk, and it's been come up many times, like just changing things on the fly, like changing personnel, having people just be there for the sake of being there. Like, it's just a weird thing, because if you notice back in old G4, even on an old Attack of the Show, when there was multiple people there were usually people there with a purpose. It was usually people all in the conversation, people that had something to contribute, some thoughts to actually bring to the table, and actually do things that kept the audience engaged, even if they weren't there regularly. Like Adam Sessler would appear on Attack of the Show randomly to talk with Kevin Pereira or Olivia Munn about something gaming related or gaming adjacent or stuff, or they'll have Chris Gore show up on X-Play or something like that, or Allison Hayslip will show up on X-Play, even though she did cheat and stuff. Like a lot of things all over the place like that, but you didn't really get that with new G4. You got it more where it's, again, winging it.
No, exactly. And people made this mistake. I think people they thought that bringing this back, oh, this is easy. We know what this is. That's easy to reproduce. Maybe they didn't understand, G4, the original G4 never really had that big of a budget, but it was a tight production. I mean, they're very tight. I mean, their ad marks, you could watch X-Play. Those are very well produced 3 to 5 minute reviews. That's what surprised me, because their experience, the executives, Frost said, so much was in linear. So you think that they would know this, but it's like with reality TV, from the outside, it looks like anyone can do that. Come on, you just put a camera, people do stuff, you're done. When you really, all of that is scripted. There's very thorough planning, and just, you're right, just throwing it out to the wind, especially when you had a brand that it had a certain flavor back then, and maybe that doesn't really fit with what they were trying to do now.
And you know something, because I know Frosk brought up linear a lot during your conversation with her, and I think that it's fair to say that. And it's fair to put some blame, or a good amount of blame, on leadership behind the scenes with Comcast. I think that's easy to do. what I think we fail, or at least a lot of people looking at this fail to really understand, is that there's blame all over the place, but blame for a variety of different reasons. You could easily compare G4, what they wanted to be, whatever it was, whether it was more digital stuff that was online on the internet as streaming with Twitch and all that stuff, or linear being on the cable network for Comcast and stuff. The easiest comparison I usually draw it to when I look at some of the personalities and the way that things were handled is something like ESPN. Some of the personalities that they have on there, like Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharp, or anything else like that. Bunch of different people, their personalities, they have their expertise with certain shows, certain verticals or whatever else. The problem was, or at least when you look at the two, with ESPN, even though they are linear, they still do have a presence like digital and stuff, but they have a sense of direction. They have not only their brand identity, but they also have an idea of like, okay, this is what everybody's role is. This is what we do. We don't deviate too much from that, but we make it so that way the audience is first and we actually give them the product that they're coming there for. With G4, obviously, they were going to do gaming stuff. They were going to do entertainment stuff, but there was so much like just non-leadership, it felt like, and non-like sense of direction just all over the place. Even with the conversation that you had with Frost, the way that she described things, which one of the things I left a comment on your video at the time. I know you responded to it, but if anybody hasn't seen it yet, like I went into a detailed comment saying like some of the things that she was describing don't feel like they match up to what other people have said, or what other things have come out, like in the Washington Post. I believe it was Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Washington Post. That was reported on and stuff. It's like, look, I get it. It's her perspective. Again, like she was there. Like she's the best source to go to talk about some stuff like this, as well as some of the other hosts like Gerard, like Black Okage, like anybody else, Adam even, and such. But when you start to look at everything, and you start to look at the full landscape of things that have come up about this network up until this point, up to the point I would even argue to when they shut down the stuff, there's a whole bunch of other things just like all over the place that just feel like it's in such cognitive dissonance. It's just really weird. And it looks not only there were problems there, but it looks like the problems were even worse, like than anybody could possibly imagined.
That is the weird thing. I remember when I had written the article actually for a whole different organization, but whatever, it came together so Bleeding Fool worked to be, and we finished up on that first investigation. I had talked to 2 or 3 people that had worked. No one wants to go on the record. That's kind of where I like
NDAs. NDAs is a big,
No, and that's why I kind of like, I'm going a little easy on Sessler and Frosk, but they did put some skin in the game to actually talk to people, which is more than everyone else has done. But they told me things like, cases like, for example, like Frosk didn't have permission to go give the speech. So, I hear that from a number of people. My report is basically like, this is what I'm hearing. And then it comes out, oh, actually, this person says something else. And they're like, oh, Peter, you made it up. You're lying. And it's just like...
No, I don't think you made anything up. You did your job. Like, you did more work than a lot of other outlets did, like, to your credit.
No.
Like,
and I think the point, when I think we're hearing that is like, even these last interviews, Sessler says no, that she didn't have permission to give the thing. Frost says yes. It sounds like...
You know what the problem is, though, with this? Like, and, well, again, there's so many things you got to do one thing at a time. With Frost, outside of the fact that, like, she openly admitted in your conversation, like, she did this thing that was totally different than what was initially planned. And I guess she talked to some people around her, but, like, there goes to that lack of leadership or the lack of cohesiveness, where it's like, not everybody's on the same page. Not everybody knows what's going on. Like, again, you could see it with Gerard that was on the broadcast. You could obviously see it with Black Okage, even though he was, like, bigging her up during the broadcast and stuff. It's like this lack of, like, okay, like, this is the type of thing you don't see on other networks, and you don't see with other personalities with other networks, because stuff like that is not really the best thing to do. I understand her logic and her reasoning and the things that she described about, which is fine. But on the outside looking in, especially because I saw this as it was going up, and I'm pretty sure you did too, when it was going out and stuff in the various segments, and I know that they shared it on social media. You look at that and it's like, okay, well, you were supposed to be talking about games and stuff. What changed? Like, why did this change? And then when you start to hear all these other things, it's like, this is all this chaos in here where it seems like everybody's just all over the place.
Yeah, it's really bad when the people that work at the company day to day have no clue what's going on.
They're like caught off guard. Like you can't feel like you can't. I know a lot of people were angry about that stuff, and a lot of the ire goes towards Frost because she's the one in front of the camera. That's the thing that I felt that I had a big problem with, but for a while, not just with your conversation with her, but even like in some of the other stuff that came out on social media. It's like there's a real lack of responsibility in the sense it's like you're the one in front of the camera. Like obviously There's other things that go with it. You can't just put all this responsibility and this blame on Frost for what happened with the network. Ultimately, there's a lot of different reasons. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the content and the way that people react to it, especially the audience, their audience is looking at you on camera. They're looking at you do your stuff. You're the one that decided to choose to actually do this speech or do whatever it is that you want. You know, it could have worked out. The audience could have gone the other way and everybody would have applauded her for a W. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what happened. So when you see people reacting to this, it's like, you can't ultimately say like, you know, it's unjustified because it's like, yo, you put that in front there.
I agree.
You got to take ownership of that in some way. When Stephen A. Smith on ESPN says something that's wild or brazy or crazy like that, he's in front of the camera. He owns that, you know, especially when he's wrong. I know, and again, he might not be the best example, but I've seen him many times when he's wrong and stuff, he'll apologize and go on camera live and apologize and like say whatever, you know. There's a lot of different things that go along with it, but the ultimate point that I want to make is that when you're in front of that camera, regardless of what type of talent that you are, regardless of what happens and stuff, the audience is looking at you. They don't care about necessarily what's going on behind the scenes. They don't care about the people behind the camera. You're in front of the camera. You're the one that they're watching on this content. And at the end of the day, you're the one that has to bear that responsibility.
Definitely. No, and that's, if I obviously wasn't her, so I can't speak, but if I feel like with the information we have now, if I was in that position, you just have to take an executive action and get on top of it. Like, even if all the leadership is playing games so they don't really want you to know what you're supposed to do because they like that you're uncomfortable and you don't ever know quite what is right, you still, like, you got to get on top of it, you know? Like, she should have followed through on the interviews. She should have explained more. If that was going on and there was a dearth of information, you know, she had the information. She could fill that up at least somewhat.
There's another thing I wanted to bring up. I'm sorry to interrupt, but like, there's another thing I wanted to bring up that was related to this, the social media stuff. And obviously I want to get to Sess in a bit, but like with her specifically, that's another thing that I feel like there's like almost feels like a sense of lack of responsibility being taken. Like I listened to the whole interview, give it the benefit of the doubt, and I'm glad that we got that talk that you got with her.
Dude, say whatever you want. I'm not offended. It's fine. Like, say whatever.
But I want to make it clear, like, for everybody that's listening, like, look, like, it's good to get all the perspectives and stuff, but now having heard everything and looked at it and listened to it and stuff, like, the things that when you guys got into the conversation about the social media posts, especially after the people got laid off, it wasn't just people like me and others like us that were kind of like looking at this like, what the hell are you doing? Like, there were people that I know that I've seen like in the games industry, like at IGN, like at the Washington Post, many other outlets that had a big problem with that. You mean to tell me that you lack the self-awareness to realize like people were not only upset with that, but also you thought about tweeting again, another joke after that? Like, there's got to be a point where it's like you take a step back and like, you know what, like, let me just chill. Let me just take a step back and reevaluate here because, or having someone come over and be like, maybe you shouldn't tweet right now. Like, I know she mentioned her wife.
Maybe take a break from Twitter.
Take a break from Twitter and social media and stuff. But like, even before all that, like when things were in the thrust of everything, like after her speech or her rant, whatever people want to call it, like the way that she was talking to people on social media, the way that she had agreed or said that she wanted to go talk to people on YouTube and stuff, and then walked that back, which at the time, you know, again, without getting into the stuff that we know now, at the time, I thought it was because she got her coat pulled by Comcast or by the people that were higher up. Because if I was at a network, if I was an executive at a network and something like this happened, I wouldn't want my talent to go talk to all these other channels and all this stuff. Like, that's just common sense. Like that, at the time, that's what I had thought. But it just felt very awkward. It felt very weird. And it felt very just kind of like the worst of moves to be acting the way that she was on social media after all this stuff was going on. Because it not only came off to the audience that was being a little antagonistic, a little bit brazy to a sense, but also it just didn't help anything. This is why when she was talking about Gerard and stuff, I was like, you know what, maybe that's why Gerard was a little bit pissed off, because it's like all this stuff happened at the same time. You know, can you blame anybody for being like, yo, get off Twitter or get off social media or chill, just relax for a bit?
Yeah, that is kind of the weird thing with Frosk. It seems like even those who had before really agreed with her, they kind of got her in this position, if I'm being honest, because they magnified it like times 1,000.
By a million. Really?
Yeah. When by the time she does the lizard thing, people are like out. Like, they're even the people who are kind of like supported, maybe they're like a Luke Plunkett at Kotaku, or maybe some of the people at the Washington Post.
I know I saw Brian Altano specific. That was the one I remember that was really pissed off, because A lot of people, they didn't respond to that tweet directly. I saw a lot of people doing indirect tweets or like referencing it, and you knew exactly what they were talking about, like, because they were all discussing it in threads and stuff. And I was like, wow, there are people that are really pissed off at her right now, and I can understand.
I wonder if that's because it's different because they're in the same industry. So maybe it's like the tolerance they might have for like an Anita Sarkeesian or Zoe Quinn or any of those people. They aren't technically working in. They're not journalists. They're not technically working in media in the same way. So maybe when they screw up, that's just expected. But she's one of us. Like, you know,
well,
it's like,
I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it because, like, you know, people literally had just lost their jobs. I think it was the same day. I think, even if again, I might be off on the timing, but it
was around the same period. I don't know if it was exactly the day, but that's how people interpreted it.
It was bad enough to get a reaction from people that was so visceral. That was like, come on. I remember tweeting to her. I was like, listen, you come on now. Like, this was the wrong time. This is the wrong thing to tweet. Like, if I would have had been her in that position, I would have taken that down and apologized. I think that would have been the smarter, more classier thing to do, considering a lot of your colleagues at the time all left. Granted, again, not knowing any of the stuff that she had talked about back then, but it felt like that. The other thing too, again, even before then, just the way that she was talking to other people on social media. I get that the internet is the way it is. We both know the internet could be really harsh, really unforgiving, really kind of unfair at times in the least like craziest of ways. But the main thing is though, is that at the end of the day, you're also the professional. You're also the person that's the talent here at that. There's a lot of other people that in various forms of entertainment that handle this completely different from what I've seen and what I've observed. And again, different situations, different things. You can't really compare the two. But like, I know a lot of people from what I saw would have handled that very differently. And they would have been like, you know what, either just not talk to the bigots that you see that are annoying you at the time, or just, again, like not tweet the way that she was tweeting at the time. But again, that's just my stance on it.
I mostly agree with that. I wonder about different things. Like maybe it's because she doesn't quite fit totally into like any particular camp, because she was out of the country when all the culture war stuff was happening, you know, around 2014, 2015, when a lot of this was getting very hot, things were switching. She was out in China, and it kind of feels like on some things she's like a little behind the times. So she obviously, the people who are more, let's say, this is not a good way to describe it, but people who are more on the right, they don't want to have anything to do with her. People on the left, she's not quite fully on the team. And then of course she does this. So now she has like 0 allies left, like maybe like 2 people.
I don't even think it gets into the political thing about it. Like, I know a lot of people looking at G4, looking at how people act on social media, they bring in the political element to it. I think that it doesn't have anything to do with that. I think it really comes down to both class and etiquette. And I think it also in the way that you conduct yourself as talent like that, because you could be brazy, you could be bold, you could be blunt, you could argue even with your audience and stuff. But I think it's the way you go about it, the way you handle yourself. And I think that the way that you also react to the reaction that you're getting and stuff. Because let's be honest here, I think me and you both could agree, like a lot of the stuff that Frost was touching on with her speech or her rant, like there are things in there that we could agree with. Like, look, there's a lot of bad people out there on the internet sometimes. There are sometimes very immature, bigoted, and foolish people that could do stupid things. Like some of the stuff she was talking about. I'm pretty sure you could go around somewhere and find it. A lot of people made a big deal of like, oh, there's no proof of this and all that. I think that's ridiculous. I think that sometimes there are things that happen on the internet you just don't know about, you just don't see, that are just there. But like, you know, the way that things were handled, the way you go about stuff like that, the way that how when people reacted to it, like, you know, and even just the speech itself like that, there's a better way to go about it. I felt like you could have that conversation even on the new G4. You could have had a whole segment. You could have brought on other female, you know, colleagues of hers, you know, other talent, or even some of the other male talent, and have like a big conversation about it. But I just feel like the way that it went about like that and the fallout with everything was just all handled in the worst way possible. Just made it so much worse.
Even the best laid plans, if the audience, if you are trying to attack the audience or the audience interprets you as attacking the audience, it almost never goes well. That's kind of like it's like the one law of the internet.
Never talk down. It's not even just never attack the audience. Never talk down to the audience. You got to talk with the audience. Like the way we're talking now, like in our conversation now, the audience can listen in on this, and like we're not patronizing them. We're not talking now and be like, oh, you got to feel this way, or you're this, and that, or you got to believe this, or you're a fool. Like, no, it's not like that. And I think that that's the way that they should have handled it. And again, you could blame that on her, but I think you could blame that really on the management of G4 when you really look at it, because when they're the ones that are also helping the talent trying to figure out how this content is made, there's a lot of blame to go around. But at the end of the day, you live and die by your audience, but you also have to cater to them in a way where it's like you're talking with them, not down to them.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if, I think people maybe were assuming like I was okay with what Frosk had said, or
I saw that. That wasn't fair. The way
I just like that. I felt kind of like there was just already a history, and I covered that enough. But it's tough. It's tough. Why? I am curious to know that. Why do you think what she said has had? I mean, it's a year later. People are still talking about this. Like a lot.
You want to know why? You want to know why? Because it's such an easy example to point to for a lot of different people. And I'm not talking about just the YouTubers out there that are making a quick buck or a quick pop with their audience stuff. Because she was easy pickings, and what happened to her was easy pickings, and what happened to G4 was easy pickings for YouTube content creation stuff for people to make videos about. Because that's what the hot topic was at the moment. That wasn't the zeitgeist, but it was what was the gossip at the moment. You know, this is why you had a bunch of videos from all these creators talking about this stuff. Really, on top of that, though, the reason why we're talking about it even now is because it is a prime example of how not to go about catering to your audience, but also how not to run a network, let alone a channel, and also to know your audience and to know what your content is to cater to them. Because, look, after her rant / speech, they had the whole segment with Amaranth on that other show that they had.
That's right.
Which
with
I'm
the
sorry,
VTubers.
like, I get that one thing might not have to do with the other. Like there could have been like a timing thing that just wasn't up, which is why, number one, you don't do stuff that you don't tell your whole entire team about. But also, it just is such a comedic and just goofy timing of things that just makes it all look like just a comedy of errors. It looks really bad like that because you have this one person, your talent, coming over here, like talking down to the audience for expecting what they expected from old G4, which is really what it was. There's nothing wrong with that, but you can understand why the audience was expecting, you know, the pretty women like on there, or the pretty guys, or the beautiful people on there talking about entertainment or talking about games, because that's what old G4 had really built its foundation on, especially Attack of the Show with Olivia Munn, with Kevin Pereira, with Allison Hayslip, with Kristen, I think it's Kristen Perez. I could be getting the name wrong. There's a bunch of talent that was like that she did she did the whole news segment on on Attack of the Show. I can't remember her name at the moment, but it was around the net. It was around the net and some other stuff that they had did. But you would have people that look visually pleasing on camera. You can understand why some people think like that. But when you have that one person that is talking down to you, that's telling you that, hey, you shouldn't be doing this or you shouldn't be feeling this way. And then literally the next show afterward or the next day, you have something like that in front of everybody. I mean, come on now. Like, it just looks pretty bad.
I agree. I don't know if it was the network really trying to turn that around, or it doesn't seem like the teams were communicating.
I don't even think it was dumb. I think it might have already been in the cards, but just it worked out like that. It just, it just happened, and it sucks because I feel bad more for the people behind the camera, because it's the entire team that now they have to deal with all that. They have to deal with the fallout of everything, but it ended up being the way that it was.
The people I've talked to, some of the people who are more willing to reach are people like that worked on G4's social media team in some way. So maybe their analysis, or maybe they were in charge of like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, whatever it is, ads. Okay. They seem to be more like the people who are willing to reach out. So far, that's been my experience, at least when you ask them questions. And almost to a one, they are almost like they have a little bit of G4 battered spouse syndrome. They're like, they feel really bad about this. And it seems like the people who are there, even though the result looks just incompetent as can be, they were really invested to what was happening. And so they feel terrible because they feel like they worked on this thing so hard, and now it has such a nuclear, such an atomically bad reputation. It's like they don't even want to be associated with it anymore.
I think also there's a lot of bitterness on many different sides. I think also the people that were from old G4, both behind the scenes and also probably in front of the camera, because they'll never admit it, but I'm pretty sure some of the people that we all know probably have an opinion about everything that was going on. One of them even has a documentary coming out sometime soon about all of this stuff, as far as like old G4 and old Attack of the Show. But the main thing, I think there's a lot of bitterness on all sides. And I think that there's also a lot of this kind of like, I know the guy that I written about that did that interview that was running Attack of the Show. He was that one actually like helping like set up the show and stuff, not in front of the camera, but behind it. he was one of the things where he had a problem where Frosk, and I think it was Frosk and somebody else, but I think mostly Frosk, came out and said that they were trying to fix the sins of the past or fix the mistakes of the past.
Yeah, someone said, really, I don't know if it was Frosk though, but yeah, someone had said
I forgot
that.
exactly who it was, but I know he came out and said that. It was like, he had a big problem with that. I was like, yo, listen, like, we went for a number of years. You didn't even last a year. What sins of the past are you trying to fix? Like, what type of thing are you trying to, like, fix? Like, and I can understand that. Like, it might not be right. You might disagree with it, or anybody else might disagree with it, but like, can you blame a person who had, again, for a long time been with that brand, had built it in some way, feel that same way when somebody else is coming over here and they're doing whatever and they're making comments like that? This is why I said, like, there's a lack, almost a lack of responsibility with things that were put out there, the energy that was put out from some of these people, not just Frost, but other people too, that I saw, that weren't necessarily in front of the camera, that was very questionable. It was very, like, again, all over the place. Again, we'll talk about Adam too. We'll talk, again, I'm pretty sure about Black Hokage, even Golden Boy. There was things that I saw from Golden Boy that was not cool, that I felt like really just didn't help. There was other people that I saw on social media, on Twitter specifically. I can't remember the names. I'm forgetting all these names.
My brain is really tired because I've been traveling, so
it's like
I'm bad on names at the moment too.
Yeah, right. Like, it's just that I remember looking at this stuff, and it was people that used to work at G4 right up to the point when they got laid off or they got fired or let go. And it's like, they're making statements, just taking pop shots at the audience and at people. And it's like, look, this does not help. This is only making things 1,000 times worse. And it's like, it just was a mess. It was a real mess.
Yeah, well, it does seem like you disagree to some point, but I mean, some of the cultural stuff is like, G4's flavor was a certain way, and this new flavor, this new crew of people who have more influence in gaming media, totally different. Some of them feel that the kind of stuff that G4 used to have, especially with like Attack of the Show, it's like really big no-nos. That was terrible. How could you have done that?
This is why I agree with some of the people that said, like, if that was the case and if that's the way that they felt, don't bring those brands back. Make something different. Make it in the spirit, like a spiritual successor to G4, but call it something different. Don't bring back Attack of the Show or X-Play. Make a new show. That way it's looked at as it is for what it is, like that. And then people don't go in with the expectations. I think that they did that obviously because of the brand and obviously because of the name resonance between different people and the legacy that stuff has. That's why people went in like that, looking and expecting what they saw all those years ago.
From what it seems like, I've just been listening to some people, very good input, people that love it, people that hate it, that did the interview and talking about this stuff. One of the good points someone did make is like the stuff with Frost and how it went down kind of felt like a win. It's like, look, they're taking something we cherish. They're always doing this. They're always taking things that we cherish, that have value, and they degrade. They bring them back and they degrade them. And this time, actually, no, we pushed back and we won. And I think that I don't know if that status quo or those feelings about will change.
I don't know if I agree with that, to be honest with you. I think that's borderline an immature way to look at it because, look, like,
I agree it's immature, but I think many people do feel that way.
There's probably a lot that do, but the reason why I disagree with that is because, number one, it's hard to bring back brands that had such a resonance. It's like trying to bring back a show from the 70s or the 80s and trying to modernize it and try to do all these other things. Like, it's never going to have the same type of vibe and stuff, but also, like, there's going to be all this scrutiny for, like, okay, it's not being done right, it's not doing this, it's not whatever, like that. I think that also, keep in mind, the type of talent that they had now wasn't the same type of talent that they had back then. I know Chris Gore has talked about it a bunch of times, like, like, there was people that had a different sense of humor. There was different people that had different types of expertise in the way that they could kind of mesh with other people. This is why they had, like, the way that they did with Attack of the Show, X-Play, and other stuff where people could just show up in other shows, but it would still feel like it was cohesive back then. With now, again, you just have the people that are just kind of thrown in there. Again, not the same expertise, not the same type of personalities, not the same type of, like, approach to what they had back then. So I don't know if I would say, like, they're always trying to take something, like, degrade it, because again, that's a very super subjective and borderline immature way to look at it, because I would have wanted new people for G4. I would have wanted to see new personalities. Hell, even if we didn't get Adam Sessler and Kevin Pereira, I would have been interested to at least look and see what it had to offer, like that. And they could build up new stars. There's plenty of other content creators they could have gone to and other talent that they could have did. One of the biggest things that rubbed me the wrong way and why it could have worked was the thing with Miss Click. I don't know if you remember this, because I wrote about it a while back, where she did the interview and that she checked out after she had her interview with the way that it was going down, that she felt like there was a lot of stuff going on That was wrong. I don't know if you remember this.
You're gonna have to refresh my memory.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
so refresher, Miss Click was on a podcast show sometime, I want to say like a month or two ago, prior to the new year starting. She had detailed her experience getting interviewed as talent to go work at G4.
Oh, yes, yeah. And then now I remember. Yeah, she revealed the questions they asked. Yeah.
Yeah, and on all this stuff like that, where she checked out and stuff. And she felt that there was a lot of problems with that because it's like, that's the direction, that's the motivation for like what you're trying to, the vibe you're trying to build for this brand and this like whole network and stuff. Is like, she even asked, like, why were you even canceling Batman? Like, what type of question is that? Like, what the hell is this? Like, she talked about it openly. What rubbed me the wrong way about it is that some of the G4 talent that were on camera at G4 she basically came out and called her a liar and basically said like, she doesn't know what she's talking about. She's like, yeah, I have the interview email to do it, like, to do all this stuff. But my point is like, there's just all these different things that just compound and just like, you look at them, you hear these stories and it's like, come on now, like there's all these different things that are going around. It's like, you can't help but feel not only a little bit bitter, but also like take like a condescending eye and just be like, like some of this seems more self-inflicted than anything else, like with the way that it went down.
Yes. Hey, I don't think they should have too many. I don't think they should have too many aspersions. I remember the original. There was this one show. It was very short-lived. It was two brothers, and they destroyed buildings, but like only with their hands.
Big Kaiju Battle? I think it was called Big Kaiju Battle, where they juxed up in suits, and it was like they were literally having like Japanese monster fights. I knew the guy that actually worked on that he was part of the gig and stuff that I used to talk with and stuff. He used to actually dress up in the suit and actually do that show. It was like really goofy and ridiculous.
No, and it's like, it's silly. It's like, guys, this is what it is. It's not. You look, if you're going to do this, you got to do it right, and you got to assume there's a certain way to go about this. You can't be
you gotta be mindful of it. Like, so I guess we could talk about it now because like Adam Sessler, like, I mean, at this point, like I don't know if you know, because I've talked about it a few times, but I don't know if you specifically know, but I'm a huge Adam Sessler. I was a huge Adam Sessler fan.
That was one of my biggest, recently.
That was my biggest inspiration for getting into games media, or one of them. It was him, Colin Moriarty, as well as also Victor Lucas. Victor Lucas was old G4, was Judgment Day with Tommy Tallarico. Like those were my guys that I followed a lot, and I really loved what they did as far as games. Specifically Adam, because Adam was blunt. Adam's always been blunt. He's always been brazy the way he does stuff. The thing that really rubbed me the wrong way and really saddened me a little bit was like, not only in the wake of all this stuff going on with G4 while the network was still up, but the post aftermath stuff with it. It's just like the way you talk to the audience on social media. Like, I get it. Even again, that interview that he did where he said like he even openly admitted that he was doing stuff for the sake of like generating views or generating controversy stuff. I get it. But none of that has anything to do with what's his attitude now. Like just the way that he talks to people. It's like, how can you really like have sympathy or have empathy for someone when they're being like that? It really sucks.
I agree. I mean, I'd love to talk about Tommy Tallarico on back on G4. That's like it deserves like a
problems.
That deserves a huge deep dive. Like just like they would review games he was actively working on at the time, and that was like
talking about conflict of interest, like big time. Like, oh my god! But my main thing is that getting back really to Adam, it's like this is a person that I've followed for years. I've met Adam Sessler.
Really?
At my first I've gone to E3 for 5 years in a row prior to the pandemic. And I met Adam Sessler at my first E3. Like we were both going to the Ubisoft press conference together. That was the first time I really got to talk with him and stuff. And he had always been nice to me in person and stuff. But like over the years, like between this stuff and what I've seen recently on Twitter, he ended up blocking me on Twitter, all because I asked him like, yo, Adam, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? Like it was one of those things where it's like, you're seeing this person while out and like just go after people. Like, I get it. Again, the internet is going to internet and it's going to be a pain in the ass to some people. However, like there's just a certain point where you got to just be the pro. You got to be the person, you got to be the mature person in the room, the adult in the room, and not wild out on people. Like some of the stuff he was saying recently, like post G4 closing down was just like crazy to me. It's like, people will look at that and be like, no wonder this network went down, because look how they're talking to the audience that build them up. Like,
I wouldn't blame a single person. No, I don't blame a single person who sees that stuff, but like, well, no, duh, this thing fell apart.
And you know what makes it sadder? Like, again, personally for me, and again, I've talked about it a couple of times. I haven't talked about it openly a lot, but like originally, the first time I had gotten blocked by Adam Slusser, I've been blocked by Adam Slusser twice. The first time that it happened was when I saw him. He was actually wilding out about Colin Moriarty. This is something that you could go back, on Twitter and even on YouTube, because I know Colin has talked about it. Adam has talked about it with David Jaffe, by the way, on his podcast, where he said, like, he didn't even remember what he was pissed off at this guy was about. He was just wilding out and saying some outlandish stuff on Twitter about this person. And I remember the first time he blocked me, I asked him, like, what are you doing? Like, why don't you call the guy up? If you got a problem, like, hit him up. You guys know each other. You've been in the same room with each other. That's your colleague in the industry. Call him up.
Send him a DM at least, for gosh sake.
Send him a Twitter DM. Like, he blocked me for that. He ended up blocking a bunch of people because there's a problem with some people in the games industry on social media where it's like they don't want to be challenged or questioned, or they don't want to hear anything. They just want to put stuff out there and everybody accept it. And just, if you do that, you either get blocked or you get insulted and all these other things. And I think that's such a bush league and like crappy thing to do to someone.
Yeah, no, and I think that's kind of what Frosk was able to tap into, was like the latent energy of 1,000 dying suns from just all the very many times people associated with gaming media or gaming journalism are just AWOL. Just like a long history of this, and like there was this moment that kind of like crystallized it all. It was just like, this is like raw, this is like the raw essence of all those times you saw people act crazy. You're like, aren't you a games journalist? They're like, blah, 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 and then, block.
But even then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I people would say, was that fair? No, it's not fair, but people are not rational always. And that is still, I mean, for legitimate reasons, that is still for a lot of people when they think of the games media, that it's kind of an open wound.
And it's kind of a fair way to look at it. Again, if you're on the outside looking in, like we're in the games industry in some way, so we have like the benefit of actually seeing it from the inside out like that. But on the outside looking in, for the common person that just watches this stuff, that's not, contributing to a YouTube channel or writing stuff like that, they look at that and they're like, yo, like, what's the matter with you? Like, why are you talking down to your audience like this? Obviously not seeing the full context of things. But even with that, like, there still comes a point where it's like, look, you're the professional. You're the person that everybody's looking at. You're the person that's the talent. You're the person that's there, that's associated with this brand or this
set the example.
And, like, just there. Like, with Adam specifically as the prime example is like the worst way to go about it. The second time Adam blocked me was most recently, when he was literally saying the most craziest things I've seen him say personally, like on Twitter. Like, this guy, which I know Colin has talked about it and a few other people have talked about it in various places, like, this guy was talking about dudes whoring out people's daughters to make ends meet. It's like, in an industry where we have a lot of feminists, or people that identify with feminist philosophy and things that are like, trying to push women in gaming and industry in some way like that.
Yeah.
That's the worst thing you could put out there on social media. That's like a horrible thing to say. So when you see that, you naturally are asking, like, yo, what the hell is the matter with you? Like, what are you doing? Like, why are you putting that? And I ended up getting blocked after that, after seeing something like that. And it's like, it gets harder and harder to have empathy, and it gets harder and harder to understand how things got to this point when you're seeing stuff like this, because it's like, dude, you're a you got more years than me. I know Adam's got way more years than I do in this industry, and I know better than to actually talk to people like that, especially to the audience. Like, he was coming out and saying that he didn't care about gamers. He was saying some outlandish stuff like that. And it's like, come on now. That's your audience. Like, that built your career. Like, can you blame anybody for feeling the type of way?
It seems like Adam, I don't know what, so we only ever see really a sliver of these people. So it's hard. But from a professional, from an outside media perspective, it does seem like he has a problem having people appreciate him. Maybe he doesn't understand that there are a lot of positive feelings from his work, and that, not everyone that comments or asks, hey, Adam, are you doing okay? This is like, ha ha, you're having a mental breakdown, what a loser. And it's really like, hey, are you doing okay, my fellow human being that I used to have a lot of respect for?
Like, it's a generalized thing where I feel like those people, I feel like Frost has done the same thing. I feel like Golden Boy and a lot of these other people that were talent on this have done the same thing with the audience. Golden Boy was co-signing a lot of the stuff that Adam was saying at one point. Like, you could literally go see this. Like, if you're on the outside looking at this, you're thinking like, yo, people from G4 are okay with people talking like this to gamers that are tuning in like that, saying that they're not going to reproduce or that they're not going to be part of the gene pool. It's like, come on now. Like, those are the people that are tuning in to G4 on YouTube or on the cable network and stuff at the time anyway. But it's like, they make these generalized statements, or they take this generalized view of like what internet trolls or what the internet nonsense could be at times like that. With me, after the first time I got blocked by Adam Susser and I ended up getting unblocked, was because a lot of other people, when they were doing that G4 needs talent thing, which we could get into, that was a whole other like can of worms that was like ridiculous, where I ended up submitting a thing and a lot of other industry friends were like tagging him and tagging me to share it and stuff. And he ended up unblocking me to see the video and stuff that I had submitted. But like, it was like,
amazing.
You know what I mean? Like, you just look at stuff like that. And again, me looking at stuff like that, it's like, come on now. Like, you know me enough like to not wild out, like not to block me like I'm some internet troll randomly like trying to get at you and stuff. But like, it's not just me, it's other people that are probably thinking the same thing that are seeing this thing. It's like, yo, I've rolled with you for years. Why am I going to be treated like crap? Like, come on now.
That's amazing. The people on Twitter who do that, they'll block you and then they'll unblock you, like look at an old message or like see what you're doing. Oh, back, you're blocked again. That's a legit
thing that happened to me with him. And again, I take him more to heart. And I know like I've had other colleagues in the industry tell me like it's not that deep and stuff. He just didn't want to be questioned or whatever. But I take it to heart because again, I've met him in person. I've talked with them. Like, I try to treat people with respect in the industry, and, you know, not just because I want to work in this industry, but also because you want to be decent to people that are around you, that are associated or parallel to you.
No,
because
totally.
Everybody at some point, like all tides are going to rise everybody up, rise all the boats and stuff at some point. But even then, like, it's just a decent thing just to be nice towards people and not like, again, not wild out and not treat people like crap. Because again, we're part of a small industry, even though there's a lot of people. We're a smaller industry compared to other things out there.
And getting smaller by the day.
And getting smaller, apparently, lately.
This is like, so some people were saying when the Frost stuff happened, you know, G4 was doomed anyways, you know, and my retort is that maybe people are overstating her effect. But the problem is that what they were trying to do was build a gentle fire out. If you've ever built a campfire, you have to start relatively small, and it doesn't take much to put it out. And so by doing this, they were kind of dousing, what they were trying to set fire to. And so, yes, you could say this wasn't very big on its own, but it stopped, things like with Adam Sessler. These things do stop people when they see, oh, G4's back. I love G4 back in the day. It was my, X-Play was my favorite show. And you turn on YouTube and then you have someone, or Twitter, and you see them yelling at me like, okay, yeah, never mind.
I think you're right. Like, it took very little to really bring this whole thing down. I think she does bear a lot of responsibility, especially with the numbers. Again, you could look at the analytics for a lot of this stuff post her speech, post her rant, that really affected not just the YouTube channel, but a lot of other things as well. There are numbers to show that, where she has to bear that responsibility because she was part of that segment. Again, she's in front of the camera. She's the talent that everybody's looking at. That's what people are going to blame. People that don't know any better, that's what they're looking at in front of the actual screen. But at the same time, I think it's a bunch of things. I think G4, it was an idea that was doomed in the sense where it's like the people that were behind it, that were conceptualizing it, were still stuck on the old stuff that didn't adapt it for now. Because the brand itself, like I said earlier at the start of this conversation, the brand itself could have endured. It could have actually lasted if it was handled with better care. But when you have all the things that what we mentioned, a lot of the dissonance, a lot of the disarray, a lot of the craziness, and a lot of the other things that just felt like it could have been easily handled much better like that, it all compounds it to like a complete disaster where it's like, not only are the businesses wasting money, I'm sure Comcast wasted a lot of money with a lot of this stuff. They burned a lot of like resources on it, between the sets apparently that they couldn't use, like the whole Emperor set. Like who gets a building with a whole set that's based on Return of the Jedi and you can't use it because of legal reasons? Like why
you're talking about, for those who where the CEO of Comcast Spectacor, his instructions for his executive suite was to make it look like Palpatine's throne room from Return of the Jedi.
What the hell? Like, what do you do? Like, I know that, again, someone like Colin Moreno, I've seen him talk about, was like, look, G4 could have worked if it was a smaller operation. You have a certain amount of time, you have a certain amount of people behind the camera, maybe. You don't need to get a big giant space or studio. The only reason why they got it was to attract talent, to get people to be like, oh, we're like a legit place or whatever. They could have had a smaller operation and endured for a lot longer. Probably did much better and be bigger than what they ended up becoming after the 11 months that they were around. Or at least that they were officially around, because the beach house was a little bit more than that. So technically they were around about a year, give or take. And it's just like, it's a shame. It's sad and it's stupid. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll go back to it. The G4 needs talent thing. That's when I knew there was something wrong, because I remember after I submitted that thing and I saw other people submitting their thing too, you never heard anything about it. And when they announced that winner, they showed the winner. It was some random person that was on YouTube or whatever. They never used them. They never actually implemented them into any of the content. They never had them. You never heard about them again. They weren't even mentioned behind the camera. It was like, what was the point of this? I felt hoodwinked. I felt like I was tricked. And I even said it at the time to a lot of my colleagues in the games industry. Like, this feels like everybody was being used for a social media campaign, for a hashtag campaign. Like, it felt very disingenuous.
It did. And that's the problem though. G4 as a brand, even though it was on cable, it did feel like, parasocial relationships, I think, are like very, very common now. But, back in the day, it really did feel like you had a connection with these hosts and, these not huge productions. And that was like one of the big benefits. It's that personal touch. And that not having that in the reboot, that's like, ugh. That was again, a very poor choice.
There was so many things, like between the general care that I felt like could have been better, the behavior on social media, the way that certain things were just handled even in front of the camera, just the way that you talk to people and stuff. It just was all over the place. Like, if in a better world, okay, honestly, you could even have the same talent there and stuff. In a better world, if they would have handled it where there was a stronger sense of direction and a stronger sense of leadership that was like, look, this is what we need to get done. This is what we need to do. We're not going to go and like be in 1,000,001 different directions. We're not going to be so disorganized. I feel like we would still have G4 today. And I think that it would have been bigger than what it ended up becoming. Look, the whole thing, when they did the whole switch on the YouTube channel, if you remember this, they switched the G4 channel and the X-Play channel. Mm-hmm. That was the stupidest idea I could have think of. Like that anybody could have done, because it's like, at this point, not only does it feel like you're admitting defeat for what's going on, but you're also like, people were subscribed to G4 for G4 and people were subscribed to X-Play for X-Play. It's like, what was the point of that? Like, you're just like messing around with the YouTube algorithm and other stuff, which I feel like probably caused all sorts of problems and other logistic things behind the scenes and stuff. It just felt like, again, it was just floundering. If that's the best word to describe G4 at like the later portions of it. It was floundering.
This is kind of the new question I really have been thinking. What do you think, or is it, maybe it's just time, but do you think people are going to be able to move away from this topic anytime soon? And if so, why? Or if so, why not?
I think G4 as a brand has been so damaged right now at this point that it's completely irredeemable. Like, you can't like really fix it up and rebrand it, or at least repackage it in a way that isn't going to be associated with all this stuff that's happened at this point. I feel like people are going to be talking about this and still be talking about it for years, like as an example of what not to do and how not to get to this point. Like, almost as a case study of like, look, you could have all the resources in the world. You could have all the brand recognition in the world, but if you mishandle it, this is what can happen. This is a possibility. Clearly, we saw it happen in front of our own eyes. Like, even to the point, it was so bad to the point, like, even when they shut things down, like, outside of people finding out through social media, which I think is in poor taste. That's 100% in poor taste.
Yeah, the completionist.
I mean, keep in mind,
that's how he announced it. That he said, I just found out I'm fired.
This was literally right before the holidays, which is bad in of itself. Like, that's wrong to me. I think that could have been handled better. But keep in mind, like, even their last image and stuff, that Photoshop image that everybody made a big deal about, saying like they finally stopped playing. It was like, even at this point, it's like, even the humor, it's like, it feels like just salt in the wound. It feels like G4 was always like known for like that crass, silly humor at certain points. Like, again, especially from Attack of the Show, where they would do stuff like that or like bring up kind of things like that. But it's like, even then, just reading the room, just like, making it to a point where it's like, okay, like, none of this is funny. None of this is cheeky. None of this is cute. All of this is just bad, by the time it was done. So I feel like people are still going to talk about it. People are still going to use it as the prime example, even as a reference point for a lot of things that happen afterwards. Like, I'm pretty sure other networks, other cable networks, like maybe not like an ESPN or something, but other networks were looking at this and be like, oh, we got to make sure we don't turn into that. You know what I mean?
No, I think you're right. I think that's what's going to happen. It will, at the very least, in people who are interested in media communications and general, like PR, advertising, they're going to look back to this. Let alone everyone else that follows.
Let me ask you too, like, do you think also, given everything that's happened right now, do you think that also other networks and other people will look at talent differently, especially with the way that talent acted? So I'm talking, when I say talent, I'm talking about Frosk, I'm talking about Adam, I'm talking about Gerard, I'm talking about Black Okage, Golden Boy, the way that they spoke afterwards, after the network went down. Do you think like people are going to look at that differently and be like, yo, listen, this is what we don't want, by the time like things are like coming to an end or things are bad and sort of stuff? Because I feel like, with the way that some of the talent, especially some of the talent like Golden Boy and Black Okage and a few others, that like they spoke, either to the audience or the way that they conducted themselves was either very contradictory to what they were trying to put up there on screen, but also just felt like it was just adding more salt to the wound. It didn't help a lot of things by the time things got really bad.
I think it's possible. And, right now the economy is not super great, and people, even in the games, people that talk about games, there's a lot of firings going on. I think you're right. I think there will be attached, at least maybe not forever, but maybe for a few years, where they will be very hesitant to greenlight projects that are similar to this, whether that's bringing back an old brand or whether it's trying to do some more like YouTube niche gaming content. I don't know about casting. I mean, I guess so, but that's not a
weird thing,
topic
especially
I
coming
know
out of
a
your
lot
conversation, especially coming out of your conversation with her where she was talking about like not going back to games and stuff. I think there's also, as much of it sucks to say, I think there's also an element of like maybe a lot of people in games just don't want to work with her, because given everything that's happened, and maybe not just her, Adam, especially, stuff was happening on social media side, because I know he's gone and done other stuff with like other industries and such. But like when you really look at it, if I'm a network executive or if I'm someone that's running a channel or a network or whatever, then I look at this type of stuff. Would I be even really like jumping at the point to hire talent like that? I would say no. To this point. Yeah.
That's October, when I started talking to people who worked at G4, that's what they said. They said that basically she was persona non grata now. Like no one is ever going to hire her for anything near this ever again.
It really sucks to see that, because nobody deserves to get that type of thing. But like when you reap, when you sow certain things, you're going to reap that type of like karma, or at least that type of thing. And again, it sounds like I'm picking on her specifically, but again, it's a prime example of what has happened literally in front of everybody of what goes down. And I can't blame other people for feeling that type of way about that.
Yeah, in the industry that she was related to, they aren't so strong that they can just have someone say or do whatever they want and things will be okay. Like she worked in esports, say she comes back, and maybe they could make it work so people
they had problems
more.
with her there too. I don't know if you
when she went
Thorn.
I think when she went freelance there at the end with LOL, she did start getting into because she unionized, and then she did the too white. She called some players. They said, she said people in League of Legends are too white.
What I saw, like she had made some comments about her former staff or people that she worked with, that there was like, combination of like people who were too white and like all these other stuff. And I remember watching a podcast or a segment of a podcast from Thorin and a few others that were commenting on that. It's like, that's not cool to say about people. I think that, things like that, I feel like are way over the line. I don't think that like when you part ways with like a group, especially if you're talent, I don't think you need to cross that line unless there was some like really serious thing. And it's a little hard to say that because we weren't there. None of us were there in the room, like, when things might have gone down or whatever. But like, it's like things like that where you look at that, where you see some of these people talk about people like her, talk about like some of the others and stuff, where it's like, it puts a bad taste in everybody's mouth. It puts a bad vibe in the air, where it's like, I don't even feel like a lot of the people that were working at G4 can really even go back to a lot of other things in the games industry because of like how things progressed.
No, that's what I was trying to say. I said, even if the risk is so high, if you are running a business, if you're trying to take care of something that's very sensitive, like, esports does well for itself, but it's not the biggest thing in the world. And they're not like, we're not going to risk our operation to take someone on that has this much baggage. Whether that's fair or not, that is how life works.
They don't want
that
those
is how
problems.
people react.
That's their business. Like they're investing a lot of money, thousands of dollars, at least in the case of Comcast. But like, even if like, going to like a place like IGN or going to a place like, like Easy Allies, like they're investing in their talent and stuff like that. Do you really think like they would want those problems? Like, I can't blame them for feeling that way, or at least any business that would feel like that.
Okay. So I'd like to ask you a little bit about the interview. That's okay.
Sure.
What did you think of the interview? If you had the chance to talk to Frosk, what would you have liked to ask? If you had the opportunity to speak with her, or maybe even Adam Sessler, what are the things that you would most want to know?
There was a lot of things I probably would have sat down and asked both of them. Again, I'll focus on Frost first because that was the one that you actually did, which, again, I think it was a good interview. It was good that you got it, too, to actually get her to talk about it, because I don't think she even said it herself. She's not going to talk about this anymore. She's not going to talk with anybody else. She's not going to really get into conversations and look back at a lot of stuff. And I don't blame her, granted, how everything has happened and stuff. I feel like that was just the one point where everybody could kind of reference to and actually be like, okay, this was her perspective on things. And I think that's fair, given what she's gone through. I think that if I was the one doing that interview and I was doing that conversation, I would have asked her a little bit more about some of the other behind the scenes stuff, not necessarily just the logistic things with management, because I think that she has a lot of bitterness towards management or upper management because she was probably dealing with a lot of stuff there. I would have asked a little bit more about the relationship with other people behind the scenes with some of the stuff that happens, between her speech, her rant, some of the other segments, seeing stuff that happened on Attack of the Show. She said that a lot of the Attack of the Show and the X-Blade staff never really cross-pollinated or whatnot, or it was the management, something if I remember correctly, and stuff. I would have asked a little bit more about that. I would have also asked more about her stuff with social media, besides the things that she had spoken on, because again, there was a lot of things that people could point to and people could go back to and be like, yo, listen, this is what you said to people at the time. Do you think that this really made it at all better? Do you feel like, looking back at it now, that this was the right move? As far as talking to other people, making the statements that she made, besides the lizard thing, which again, I think everybody universally agrees, that was just
poor
really
taste.
that was a really bad idea. And asking her, look, as a talent, as someone that has an agent, and as someone that is a working talent, I guess you could say, because I don't know what she's doing now specifically, but, do you think that's really acceptable for any talent to do something like that? Because the actions that you took, it really had a detrimental effect, not just on your career, but it also had an effect on the network that you were associated with.
Yep.
She wasn't the thing is, people don't understand, she's not the sole reason why the network went down. A lot of people have said that, but I don't think people really understand that, because it's a combination of things. It's a bunch of things that all happened that just created this whirlwind of what happened with G4. I would have also probably asked a little bit as look, some of the stuff that she was talking about with the game reviews, I know firsthand as someone that reviews a lot of games and has also done reviews for other outlets like IGN and stuff, that sometimes there is talent that does the reading, for the audio stuff with the VO, that doesn't necessarily play the game or write the review. But they also do on their actual little title cards or their lower thirds that actually says who does what, especially in IGN. That's how they actually handle the reviews. IGN specifically does that, and others do as well, but I think IGN does it the best because it's right in front of you when you actually see it. But I would have asked her, look, if that was the case, if that was such an issue and that was such a big problem that came up in conversation, why not do something like that? Why not talk with the audience about this? Why not sit down and actually talk with the audience? You guys she was talking about how she needed to fill out content for all this amount of time, or at least the X-Blade team, the Attack of the Show team, have to figure out all these different things. Why not actually, if those are issues that are coming up, why not be honest with your audience? Why not actually build that bigger bridge or that bigger connection with your audience in a way that mends a lot of this stuff or gets away from a lot of this stuff? Because I feel like if they would have did something similar to that, none of this other stuff would have gone as bad. And again, they probably would still be around today. I would ask probably the same thing of Adam Sussler, in similar things. And I would even ask him, about his behavior on social media. Because again, I personally feel a lot of that stuff for when it comes to talent, when you're representing a brand, when people associate you with a brand, you can't be acting like that. So I would have dived into stuff like that. I would have asked about look, the whole idea of working with other talent and trying to build up this brand that people know that have associated with it for so long. Why go to such an extreme or such to a point where it's you want to get away from that and not actually find what worked and cherry pick what worked besides the brand names and the shows and stuff, find out what really was the essence of that stuff and try to change it and mold it into what could work for today. Those are the types of things at least I would have probably dived into. But again, that's all hearsay at this point, because I feel like those people, Frosk, Adam, probably Golden Boy, probably Gerard, I can imagine Gerard not wanting to talk about any of this stuff anymore, because it's been beaten to death. The horse has been beaten to death at this point. But that's how at least I feel where everybody stands at this point, at least how I will look at it.
Yeah, zombie horse.
Yeah, right?
It's been brought back and been killed again.
That's the other thing too. With your interview specifically with her, I would have dived in a little bit more about her thing with Gerard, because Gerard went on record on the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and talked about it, if you remember. like that, reading about it, where he had mentioned that their relationship was strained for various
he did say
things.
that. Yeah, he said a lot more than that, but most of it was like you could read into it that he was talking about her.
Yeah, you know, I could get it that there's a bad vibe between the two. And like, again, people work in relationships, you know, everybody has that one person or two people that's like, you just don't vibe with, like you argue or you're just not in good terms with. It happens like that. But I would have asked that because, again, from how she describes, and again, when you were talking with her, you know, he was coming at it as like, look, you're making this much worse on social media. Like the way that you're talking, the way that you're going about it, this is not helping and stuff. And I can understand that, again, not knowing what exactly was said, but that's at least what I got from it. I would have dived a little bit more into that. I would have dived into also, she was saying that a lot of the other talent didn't write their own skits. And I think she never mentioned Gerard, you know, not writing his own skits, which I followed the completionist for years. He writes a lot of his own stuff. I mean, he has a team now like that, but I followed him for years. Like there's just things like that I would have asked a little bit more about.
I was assuming when she said that about the skits, I didn't think she was talking about Gerard. I think she was more saying this maybe about Black Hokage or Golden Boy, because she had made another comment about Black Hokage. He comes, he does his thing, and then he goes. So maybe that's just
the
me.
reason why I say it is because their talent, and again, like their talent, Gerard's talent, like that. She specifically didn't mention that writing his own skits and stuff. And again, could have been from a team, could have been a lot of other things. It's not like a downgrade of Gerard or like looking down on Gerard, but like those are things like that I probably would have asked a little bit more of.
No, those are good. You had several ones they're pretty good. I should have asked that. It's tough because I had prepared for her to be not nearly as open as she was, and even then, Frosk has borderline personality disorder. I have family members with that. I am very familiar with people who borderline personality disorder. You know, they say, "Oh,
you can never fully prepare." Like that's the thing with any interview. Like you think you're good, and there's always something else that comes up afterwards. It's like, damn.
You know, I was only trying to say it's like some people, especially because what she is associated with is like an outburst. It's like I wanted to play. I don't know if playing is safe, but I wanted to be there so she could share her side of the story, and I did not want to push because I was concerned if I pushed too much. And it just be done. She wants, and she's not going to talk to me again.
That's how the interview should be done. That's how like when you could even go to like people like Oprah when she does her interviews. That's exactly what she does. Where it's like, look, you want the person to be comfortable, but you also want them to talk. You know, you could pry and you could like, you know, push a little harder and be stern about the conversation and stuff. But at the end of the day, you want your interviewee to be like comfortable, and you want them to be able to be comfortable to speak. Because I feel like obviously with Frosk, obviously with some of this serious stuff and some of the things that she mentioned, that was another thing. I just realized too. She mentioned something about illegal contracts and stuff and other things, and her contract about speaking, you know, when she got paid out her contract like that. I would have asked about that because I know from looking at other networks and other things, that thing she was talking about where she got paid and she didn't have to sign anything, somebody probably got fired at Comcast for that, because there's no way there's a company that's allowing something like that that's going to happen, or just freely to go.
I emailed her afterwards, and she had insinuated. So I'm not going to say because
allegedly or insinuated.
Yeah, sometimes guests do this, but she's insinuating that it wasn't just her that had this happen, and that this is why we could hear from Sessler, and there's a very high likelihood that there are other talent that were given improper NDAs. I also asked her about the criminality specifically. Some people were like, did she say that? And she meant that there was sexism on set, but then she told me, no, I was referring to my time at Riot because that was still very raw to me. And I was like, okay, but when you say criminality at G4, what specifically do you mean? And she said it was, and she said it was like the labor losses. So like the stuff with bad contracts or G4, we play games. I'm not going to renew you unless you do things that
the thing is with me, like listening to that, when I heard that part of your interview with her, it's like, there is no network or company that would be so careless to allow someone to just like, let alone a verbal agreement, which I think like in a court of law could probably be important, because when you're talking and negotiating with someone, there is like that verbal agreement and stuff. And obviously signing the contracts is important, but you mean to tell me that the network is that careless? Comcast was that careless to give you your money that they said you have to sign this thing for first in order to get it, so that way you don't talk like that. There's something I felt like was off there. It just felt like
fishy.
You know, no network can't be that stupid unless it was the case. And again, we don't know because we're not working for Comcast or whatever. But like, There's no, I can't picture an ESPN or a Fox News or an MSNBC or like an ABC making a mistake like that, like with a talent. Like it just feels off for me. And if potentially there was others that like that, which is why you have people like Adam going around and talking like that, that's a major L. Like somebody's getting fired at some point, at that company because of that.
You would hope so. There are so many things I would have changed or done better. I feel really, it's so crazy that she agreed to do this interview in the first place. And I feel very grateful. Grateful.
You should feel accomplished because it's a good interview. It's a solid interview. It's one that people want to hear from, relations, all this stuff.
It's tough because part of me feels like, and I always try to treat my guests well, so I'm after this. I don't want to say I want to defend her, but I do feel like she has a few things right, that some parts of this have gone a little out of control, like the negativity.
Yeah, definitely.
And I do think she has a point there, but I also think you're right. It feels like she probably has a point where she says things are out of control and really they just kind of made me the face of this. Like there were so many things going wrong. But at the same time, you do feel like she hasn't taken responsibility, and whether that's fair or not, she is the face of it. And we're the face of
exactly.
it, whether you want to be.
And she did that, by the way, she did that herself. She's the one that she admitted to it in your interview. She wrote up that whole thing when she was talking about it during lunch and stuff. She went to go get it approved and stuff. They put it in the teleprompter. It's like all these different things. Like that's you. That's your thing that you put out there. It's like you have to take ownership of that. And I get it. It's hard with this type of stuff. And as a talent, it's a real pain in the butt to deal with this, of like how everybody's like just coming at her with the way that it was. But at the end of the day, when you really get to the source of this stuff, like with that thing in relation to her career, that was her. That was her decision. That was her thing that she decided to do, and she has to own that. And I personally feel like between your interview, what I've seen on social media, and again, I've been blocked by Frost. I forgot to say this earlier. Frost blocked me because I did a podcast where I was talking about some of this stuff. Like I didn't attack her or anything like that. I gave my opinion, and she ended up blocking me because I tagged her, because I was saying like, look, I'm talking about all these people and stuff. I think that was a poor choice because I'm not the only one she's done that to. And Adam obviously has done that to me too. But like, that's to me is like the worst thing you could do.
I was a little shocked I wasn't blocked.
Yeah, right? You would think, right? But luckily for you, it ended up working out good. And again, you got this conversation, which I thought was fair. If anybody hasn't told you, I felt that the conversation, the interview was fair. It was open. It was honest, or at least from what we got from her. It was detailed enough that there's a lot of stuff that, again, we're even now like dissecting and talking about and stuff, and it provided a lot of other context that we didn't get beforehand this entire time with all this stuff that was going on with G4.
Yeah, this is me just complaining and licking my own wounds and whining. But it's just like, I feel like there should be room where we can criticize someone like on a professional level and like, here's in the real world, here's where you screwed up, here's where you had, and then I can still say, there are good things about you as a person. You are not the demon that you've been set out to be. And we don't really live in a time where that kind of space is really allowed. And so it does put me in this weird position where I'm like, I think she's kind of like if I was hanging out with Frosk and we were going to play, I was going to watch her, or we were going to talk Witcher, someone's going to play Witcher, the other person's going to watch. I can see myself doing that.
And I think that's fair. Honestly. Like, I think now these days, the games industry specifically, a lot of different sides, not just the industry side of it, but even the consumer side of it. We lost the ability of how to talk to each other. Like I was just on the BBC Radio 4 and I was talking about this with Hogwarts Legacy recently. I was like, look, we could all disagree about this game. We could all disagree about a lot of things, but we can't vilify other people for feeling different than us. We can't feel we can feel different and disagree and debate and argue the whole thing, but we can't vilify people. Like with Frost, a lot of people definitely vilified her for what she did, and I understand it why, but obviously there's an element of like, look, dial it back and judge for the actions and for what it was without trying to scrutinize and completely depersonalize an individual, which I think felt like happens way too often in our industry for one reason or another.
Yeah, from both sides. It's not exclusive. I think because of the divisions, I think, when you feel like you're under attack, it encourages bad behavior on your side, and that in return encourages bad behavior on the other. Do you feel like, and maybe this is my naivete, but I always kind of hope like people who feel like they stand on the opposite side of bad things that happens in gaming media, that we should be better. And then there are instances where like, here's an opportunity maybe where you could show leadership or that, or you say you really want things to be better, and it kind of becomes clear you don't. And I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not saying people are wrong to feel the way they are, but
I don't think there is a good answer for that. Honestly,
I do worry about the arc this thing is heading in.
No, I feel you. I don't think there is one definitive answer for that, because I think that a lot of the time, a lot of the people's views about this, especially from the consumer side, from the audience side, a lot of it is ignorance because they don't see the inner workings of the industry. I think also there is an element that you have to be honest about. And the industry side, whether it's media, whether it's PR, whether it's devs or indie devs like that, where there's a sense of cliquishness that sometimes it almost feels like childish or high schoolish. Whereas like certain things run within a certain group or a bubble of people where we need to get out of that, because all of a sudden you criticize one person, now all of a sudden now you're not going to get access to a game and stuff. And that's totally wrong and totally messed up. But it happens. There's even instances where I've had in my career over my 13 years or so, where I've been open about something, I've talked about something, I've been scrutinizing or criticizing something and giving my honest opinion about something. And because a person didn't like what I had to say, they would totally cut off our relationship or friendship or our connection within the industry, whether it's PR, whether it's dev and stuff. It's like all of a sudden now you want to be labeling people as bad individuals or bad eggs because you feel differently about something. You can't just disagree like adults. You can't disagree like professionals, which is really what it is. Disagree and feel within your own stances as professionals, as opposed to vilifying people. You can't vilify, you can't degrade, you can't like deperson people. You can't look down and condescend people because of whatever views that they take and stuff like that. Even someone like Frosk, even someone like Adam, to a sense, like, and again, like I've been critical with all this stuff that we talked about up to this point. But at the same time, like if I had a choice and if I had in an ideal world, I wouldn't like want to look at those people as like bad individuals. I wouldn't want to say that Adam Sussler is a bad person. I don't want to say that Frosk is a terrible individual or is like a horrible being or anything like that. No, nobody really wants to do that. Nobody wants to be labeled that. Nobody wants to throw that on another person.
Yeah, exactly. And two wrongs don't make a right. Just because you feel the other side are a bunch of a-holes, that doesn't mean now you can be a-holes. That doesn't
mean go to say you could call out what needs to be called out.
No, like, that's totally fair. Yes,
in the whole thing. But like there's a line, I feel like, and a lot of people seem to forget where the line is or don't understand that there is a line there.
Yeah, it makes me really sad, because this is kind of what I feel like. I'm not really a culture warrior per se. Kind of what I feel like what I would like if I do good work, kind of that what I'm hoping to work people back towards is kind of how it used to be, whereas like whatever the fandom was, I go to anime convention and there are a bunch of weird people. Some people don't they're the most hijacked.
They've got no social skills. Like seriously, literally.
You could meet most of them, you could meet up with them. You would have very little, you never met them really before, but you could get along pretty well. And there's never a question like your faith, your background, what are your politics. Even if you had a terrible take on whatever franchise, it was like, oh, okay, I think that's dumb, but we're still friends. And then just something changed, and it was like I've been following games, of course, and I did notice in games. But when I was like, oh, we are really far gone, I was like Doctor Who. I was really into Doctor Who, like deep Doctor Who. And it was like these are like absurdly niche, like an absurdly niche fandom to that point. And all of a sudden, people were like posting things about, oh, you couldn't be a real fan if you were doing so and so. And I was like,
yeah, that's wrong. Star Wars fandom's dealing with that right now. Like, they've been dealing with it for a while. Like a lot of these different fandoms, Doctor Who, Star Trek, Star Wars, anime, gaming, a lot of these different things. A lot of it comes from people taking actions, not because they just solely believe in whatever it is that they're spouting out, but because they want to belong, because they want to be part of whatever clique. They want to be on the right side of history or the right side of the group and all these other things. Nobody's being honest and genuine with themselves and with the people around them stuff, because I could support whatever community that's out there, but I'm going to still play the games that I want to play, or I'm going to be honest about the subjects that I want to be honest about or how I see things. Not because it's just my job, but because that's the type of person that I feel like I am and stuff. Like, again, there's a time and a place to call things out. There's a time and a place to debate. There's a time and a place and a vibe when it comes to just kind of like be assertive or aggressive on things. But that doesn't have to be on every single thing. And that doesn't have to be on every single person or every single group. And I feel like a lot of people just don't get that, or they're just so caught up on a lot of the stuff going on with social media and everything around them, as opposed to being genuine with themselves.
I know that some of this is whiny, but that really is like, I feel that it's such a sad change. It depresses me because I remember that, and I remember how awesome it was. It was just fantastic.
That's what Star Wars is going on right now. Because again, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and like, there's a lot of things out there that some people just throw around terms or throw around certain things about people and like try to label others for certain things. Like I wrote an article about Star Wars theory and Josh from the Den of Nerds, where it's like they were talking about the whole screws and bolts thing with Andor. The guy made like an inane thought about like, yo, this doesn't look Star Wars. This looks like somebody just put it together. And immediately it was like the worst thing in the entire world. It's like, come on now. Like, you're really going to call this guy like all these horrible names over this thing? Like, you can like the show, but come on now. Like,
you just like the thing. You just liked it.
It's
bad person.
Like, oh, God forbid somebody says something bad about Ahsoka Tano. Like, all of a sudden, what, you're really going to call them like an anti-feminist or God forbid, like a misogynist or something? Well, because they just don't like Ahsoka Tano. They probably like Shakti or probably Luke Skywalker or Grievous for some reason. Like, come on, like, it's ridiculous.
That was the weirdest. So if you were to ask people, okay, Pete, what was the most astounding thing from there? But what did you learn about Frost that most shocked you? That was what shocked me, was because she actually does have some of that still. That she actually does feel like you can sit, because what I posted is 2 hours, 15 minutes.
2.5 hours, something like that.
And so there was a lot of talking beforehand, mostly introducing her and her wife to me, talking about random stuff that kind of saying the parameters of the Hebrew. And then afterwards, we talked almost an hour about Witcher. Like, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about the books.
The Witcher.
We're talking about Witcher 3. Yeah. It was great. And it was like, and she was like, yeah, like, she claims at least. Sad?
A lot of people will look past all that in favor, obviously, with the controversial stuff, with everything else, rather than seeing a complete view of everything in total, regardless of the criticism or anything else like that. It's just like, again, when you want to get a complete view on something or someone, it's like they'll ignore all that stuff in favor of everything else because, it's the hot topic of the gossip right now.
No. And I'm just saying it because it was like, it beyond the other stuff, because I do try to be principled in the work I do. I know you do too. It's what we have in common. I think it's why we both like to work with Clownfish TV, because Neon, who runs that, I cannot tell you how refreshing it is to have a steady hand of the person in charge. It's like, it's okay. If that's what you think the situation is, that's what the situation is. We're not going to change editorial to fit.
And knows what they feel like. Wait until I have to go review Hogwarts Legacy. Then
we'll see if this holds up.
Like, right? Like, but still, like, it's a sense of like, there's fairness, and there's honestly like just genuine fairness all around. And I feel like there's sometimes a lack of that, especially in the games industry, for one reason or another. There's way too much noise and way too much nonsense that gets in the way of like a lot of other things. Again, regardless of what we criticize and how we look at certain things, like, you have to have a complete outlook in order to kind of have a genuine like stance or perspective on stuff.
There is a story like Frosk. She does have a seed of it. Maybe she isn't. Maybe she's not totally being honest with me, or maybe she says things that she believes, and in the heat of the situation, acts different. I don't know. I'm not there. But she did seem to have that understanding kind of how it used to be. It was like, hello, fellow person we just met. Oh, you're into this thing I like, and we can hang out. And that was refreshing. It gave me a little taste of what it used to be like. And that made me happy. And it made me happy for her, because it was like, I'm glad you have these positive things in your life. I like you as a person. I think you did something tremendously stupid, but I could be happy for you as Indiana. That's kind of how I wrote in this one thing I did for Bleeding Fool, just talk a little bit about this, where it's like, this is Indiana. This is the human. That other person was Frosk, and everyone hates her. But I'm going to tell you, the Indiana, that person, the person that, when she's not wearing the big blonde wig. Yes. And she's actually pretty cool. I like her.
And that's fair. That's how it should be. But again, the audience sometimes, well, not the audience, but like some people in the audience.
Some people, yeah.
They'll either refuse to see that, or they just don't want to see that, or they can't see that. And it is what it is. Our job, especially as like, media people and stuff, we still just got to present it and let the audience like get whatever they want from it like that. It's just it's never our duty to like impose our opinion and our stances on stuff. It's just for our job to just present what we can, whether it's our own personal view on a game, like a review, whether it's the news, whether it's like, whatever else is going on. The audience at the end of the day is the one that interprets all that info. We just don't dictate that.
No, yeah, that was my problem when I used to do a lot more conservative media was there was kind of an expected way you would go with things. And if it didn't go that way, they would either kill it or they would want you to adjust. But my feeling about journalism is just like that. I used to serve a full-time mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Kind of one of the things you learn, I mean, some of that is a lot about converting, some what people say about, but much of the time, most of the time, it's like basic social work. You're like meeting with people who are struggling with something and you talk with them and then you help support them, whatever good goals they do, and then they do their thing. What I learned is like, it is silly. It's the old, you can bring a horse apart, you can't make a drink. Your job is you are there to do something good and you walk the person forward, but you cannot make that decision for them. And it's not your job to do so. You give them the tools, and then they choose to do with it what they will.
Exactly.
It's not always popular though, but I think it's the right thing to do.
True. I think it's fair. And again, that goes to, I call it the prime directive of all journalism. And it's like it's supposed to present information to the audience and let them decide how they feel about it and let them decide what they want to do with it. That I forgot the exact quote because again, like we're so like it's the weekend, we're all kind of like defeated now, but like I can't remember the exact quote that it was. That it's pulled from like I think it was like not the AMA or whatnot, but like it was a combination of both the Star Trek Prime Directive and one of the official journalism like APA like statements and stuff that like combined it together. But the main point was that look, like we're just here just to give you the info. You decide what to do with it. You decide how you feel about it, how you interpret it.
Yeah, part of me thinks maybe we got ourselves into the situation because people were deciding that was their job. That we are going to decide for you. And
I think that's a problem, not just with games media or just the gaming industry. That's entertainment in general. I think, remember, we use this term called enthusiast press. That usually is like, sometimes to kind of like call people not real press or not real media or not real journalists and stuff. The term game journalist gets thrown around a lot because it's usually an umbrella term for everything else that one would do within the medium. But like, it's one of those things where it's like, sometimes we just got to get out of our own way, and be a little bit more mature and be less silly with some of the stuff that goes on.
Yes. And that's kind of the thing with Adam Sussler and Frosk, where as much as I may respect them, you do say you had an opportunity to set an example and you chose not to do so.
You chose not to. Yeah. Straight up.
All right. Well, hey, Jake, is there anything else you would like to discuss? Any other thoughts you have? And of course, you have to tell us where might we find your most excellent of podcasts and articles.
Sure, no problem. Like I think we covered everything. Like literally, I think like it's a good like epilogue, I guess you could say, to like all this stuff. Like it's funny enough, I kept saying that to my own like podcast that I was doing on my own channel. It was like, this is the last I'm going to talk about, but something other thing comes up and I had to talk about it. It's just like, whatever. But so this was a cool conversation. This was fun. I appreciate it. I appreciate the convo. It was great. It's good to bounce off like thoughts and perspective with someone that also knows about a lot of this other stuff. You guys can follow me on a lot of different places. I'm on YouTube, youtube.com/@JakeJamesLugo, or you could search Jake James Lugo in the search bar. I am uploading nearly almost every day to every single week, highly edited, highly produced videos that are reviews, let's plays, unboxings, podcasts, event coverage, etc. I am also on TikTok, @JakeJamesLugo on TikTok, every single day, uploading multiple videos about video games, including retro games, modern games, gaming-related topics, and games industry topics. I'm on Twitter, @JakeJamesLugo. You can follow me on there, posting every single day. @JakeJamesLugo on Instagram, same thing. And patreon.com/JakeJamesLugo, where I put up exclusive content you're not going to get anywhere else, including exclusive videos, exclusive podcasts, and much more other stuff. So show some love if you can. And yeah, I'm pretty sure you'll find something that you'll enjoy.
No, please do. And if what you were expecting with the new G4 was something more like the old one, if you want someone like, hey, this guy gets it, he's one of us, he's handling this fairly. That's what Jake does all the time, 100%. He does that in front of the camera, and having done a little work and then shipping in the same
writing,
digital
video,
rooms. He
editing,
is like that behind the scenes too.
Doing a whole bunch of stuff. Sometimes I think I do too much. Like I do a ridiculous amount. Again, for Cloudfish recently, I've been freelancing for them. I've been writing a lot of reviews, both about games, which a couple of the more recent games I've done was Hi-Fi Rush. I did the SpongeBob SquarePants game for the Cosmic, I think it's the Cosmic Shake, it's called. And also I did entertainment reviews, including that 90s show, Avatar, The Way of Water, and a lot of other entertainment movies, TV shows, and other stuff. So much content.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Jake. This is a great way to discuss this. Please, everyone, be sure to check his stuff out. I know you will enjoy it. And we will cut it off here. Well, until next time, friends, fans, followers, critics, however you found this, keep geeking out.